Hi, English 1302, week 11, second video. I had a student ask some pretty good questions about the poems for this week, the reading assignments for this week. And so I thought I would try to address as many of your concerns as possible in a short video. Now, poetry really is one of those things that if you think you can get it, you can. And it doesn't take any more work than a short story or a play. It seems like more work because it's more repetitive. You have to read it two or three or four times. But I've chosen poems that are specifically short simply so you can read them two or three or four times. I strongly encourage you to print out that little packet I gave you, read the poems with a highlighter or a pencil or a pen and mark it up as you go because this will help you to understand it better and remember it more easily. Kind of like the analysis matrices we did for the short stories. We don't have anything like that for poetry, but you can do this on your own, just working with the point. First things first, you really need to learn that list of vocabulary words. That's the first thing I posted was the vocabulary words. What is metonymy? What is synecdoche? Connotation, denotation, metaphor. Um, so you need to know what those words are so that when you read through the poems, if you run across one, you'll know what it is. Pretty much any time you see like or as, you know that's going to be a simile. Pretty much any time you see one thing that stands for described directly as it is something else, that's almost always going to be a metaphor. But you have to know the definitions of the word first. So learn those words first. Then read the poems carefully. Look up words you don't know, write those down, summarize the action, kind of think about what's going on. And after you've done that a couple of times and you still don't understand, look it up. Uh, I strongly encourage you to read the poems quietly, silently to yourself. Maybe stand up, walk around, read them out loud, read them to your dog. Cats don't generally like poetry, but yeah, share them with somebody, kind of get into it a little bit. You'll understand it better and you'll appreciate it a lot more. Of course, there are a lot of good websites. Poetry Foundation is a great website for poetry, but there's lots of others. Feel free to use Google. Feel free to use YouTube. I've already given you an example of how to do that. But take the 5 or 10 minutes it takes to really get into these poems. I think you'll enjoy them a lot more. I want to warn you a little bit about Robert Frost. From last week's poetry, Richard Cory, Dover Beach, Passionate Shepherd, Nymph's Reply, that's just a scatter. That's just an introduction. But starting this week, we're getting into Robert Frost for 2 weeks. So you really need to know his life. I've posted up a couple of good things for you about Robert Frost. Take the time to kind of get to know him a little bit. He's a world famous poet, acknowledged, highly honored and awarded, and just a poet that's worthy of study. When you graduate college and you look back, you say, "Wow, we learned Robert Frost," and that'll be something. Now, the first two poems, Out Out and Acquainted with the Night, are fairly sad poems, and the subject matter, the tone, is serious and somber. And if you look at the PowerPoint I provided you, you'll notice that there are pockets of sadness during his life. His mother died, and his grandfather died, and his son committed suicide within a fairly short period of time. Then 20 years later, there's another group of deaths in his life. He didn't live a sad life. He lived a pretty normal life for the time. And for the most part, his poetry is not sad. I'm not sure why he started with these two, but you'll notice the rest of his poetry is either upbeat or really more analytical, more objective than anything. But take a look at that first poem, Out Out. The title is obviously an allusion, which you remember from your vocabulary word. It means alluding to or referring to another work that the reader, you, should be familiar with. Out Out is the start of a very famous soliloquy from an author named William Shakespeare. He wrote a play called Macbeth. And one of the characters, I think it's Macbeth himself, who says, "Out, out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more." But it's about death. And the poem is about death. Although I would argue, I would suggest to you that the main idea is not the death of the little boy, and be sure you pay attention to how the boy dies. Him getting his hand nearly cut off is not really the cause of death. It contributes, certainly blood loss, but look at the real cause of death and then look at the last two lines of the poem. That's really the takeaway. That's the meat of this poem. And they, the doctor, the nurse, the sister, they, since they were not the ones dead, went back to their affairs. They weren't dead, so they went back to work. Grief is an illusion. And of course, Acquainted with the Night is about a guy who goes out walking in the rain more than once. He walks way, way far, and then he hears a cry, and then he comes back. And he simply says, I've been one acquainted with night. What you want to look at are connections, connotations. The word night is associated with sadness and aloneness. The idea of the rain is associated with tears, which is caused by sadness. And then compare that to Dust of Snow or The Runaway, which are much more upbeat and lighthearted, but those are for next week. Anyway, get in there, read the poems, read them through carefully, take notes, highlight, just enjoy it. There's a lot of good poetry out there. There's a lot of good ideas. I think you'll like it if you just spend a little time on it. Okay. Have a great week 11.